What is going on, everybody? I am back. So I've decided officially to name this Fundamental Health with Paul Saladino, MD. And I am excited and honored to have Brett Lloyd with me tonight. He is a gentleman in Florida who's going to tell us his story. So people that I've had on in the past are, Nevada Gray and Bart Kay and kind of scientists. But I'm excited to get a patient story, another person who's had a real change in their life, a real improvement in their life, eating a carnivore diet. And so the backstory is that I kind of connected with Brett through Nevada Gray, who's the paleo pharmacist that I had on a few weeks ago. And Brett reached out to me, and the more I learned about his story, I was really impressed. As many of you will know, I am a functional medicine doctor, and I'm also in psychiatry. And so stories that are connected with mood and depression and anxiety hit really close to home for me because I have been treating patients with these for the last 4 years. And it is very hard as a physician to gain clinical improvement in these things. It's really hard for me as a physician to treat patients to a point that they get better from depression and anxiety. And so when I heard a little bit about Brett's story, I just thought it was so cool. Thanks for being here, man. It's great to have you on.
Thanks so much, Dr. Paul, for having me on. It's a real pleasure, and I look forward to us putting a lot of good out into the world tonight.
I like your shirt. Where'd you get that? How come I don't have one like that?
Well, because my wife hasn't completed putting the website up yet, but she designed it. She makes professional logos and does designs for T-shirts. She's done it for 30-some years. She's really good at it.
That's awesome.
And I am 100% carnivore, and I have been for, this coming Monday will make 9 months. That's
incredible. And what's so interesting for me about the carnivore diet is that in the grand scheme of things, 9 months isn't really that long an amount of time. But I mean, that's in terms of the carnivore world, people see incredible things within months or weeks of even starting carnivore. And 9 months that's a lot of good nutrition you've had in there in 9 months. It sounds like you've had a real change. Now, I just got to ask you this question before we get into your story. What do people say to you when you go to the grocery store in that shirt?
I actually haven't worn this particular shirt to the grocery store yet because I just got it a couple weeks ago. But my wife's a month behind me in carnivory. And she gets most of the looks because she's the one who does most of the shopping, but I've been there on occasion, and it's genuinely, that's a lot of meat you all got there. And I just smile and say, yeah, and we're going to eat every bite of
it. In the next week.
And, I have had people at my gym. I watched a gentleman, I have a T-shirt that says 100% not vegan on the front, and then on the back it says 100% carnivore. I had watched some guy, and I thought, oh, this is going to be my first negative comment. He walked the length of the place to walk up to me and say, I really appreciate your shirt.
That's amazing.
And after I work out, because I only live like a mile away from my gym, and I walk home, and it's along an 8-lane highway, and I'm crossing the 8 lanes, and somebody yells out the window from a silver SUV saying, oh, I love that shirt. So it's been really nice to be able to promote carnivory just silently and with a smile on my face.
That's pretty cool, man. It's growing. As people will know from watching this channel and other channels, it's a magical thing, and it's growing, and I think it's going to keep growing. So, well, why don't you tell us a little bit of your story? Like, I'd love to hear, about your past history. And you said you'd had years and years of these issues. Just let's dive into it. Tell us in detail, what you went through and what happened. And I think people are going to be amazed at this.
Okay. I'm 58 years old. I'm a musician. I also work in retail. I grew up in Huntington, West Virginia. My parents had an enormous vegetable garden. We ate a lot of meat. We basically lived the standard American diet to the letter, as well as you could do it. We had fresh vegetables. If it wasn't picked that day, mom and dad canned it that summer. We had fresh potatoes year round, and we had tons of meat. Out of the 4 of us, mom, dad, my sister, and myself, my dad's had type 2 diabetes. He's been giving himself insulin shots for years and years and years. My mother's had numerous health problems, a long list of things, and a cancer scare. My dad had prostate cancer also. My sister suffers from ulcerative colitis,
Oh my God.
and I suffered from mental illness for over 40 years from following the standard American diet. I was first diagnosed in 1990 in River Park Psychiatric Hospital in Huntington, West Virginia with major depression. And in 1995, I started taking Prozac, and this began what I call the wellness illness cycle. I
Right.
started out responding fairly well, but over time, I would end up what I would call falling into the ditch again, and my mood would plummet, and it would always be a little bit worse, and it would last longer than the time before.
Okay.
And this cycle went on. It was diagnosis was confirmed again by another physician in South Carolina in 1997, 96, 97. And I had no clue about diet. My diet was not good. I was still standard American diet with a lot of bread, a lot of cereals, all those horrible things. And finally, a lot of this is looking back. I could see looking back now that my behavior was really starting to deteriorate, and my decision-making was really starting to deteriorate. I had problems staying in good performing bands. Everything would sound great to me, but I would hear this, "You're really hard to get along with, Brett." And I'm like, I don't understand it, because I was unable to perceive this. Let's see, I'm trying to skip certain parts for brevity's sake. In 2006 to 2007, due to a familial event I won't go into, I basically suffered your old-fashioned nervous breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped sleeping pretty much. I went for 2 months with never more than an hour or two sleep a night. And as you well know, when that happens, bad things start coming your way. You start hearing children playing in the yard when you're home by yourself, kind of stuff.
Right. When you don't sleep, things go downhill really fast.
Oh, really fast. The doctor put me on Remeron, and that got me about 3 weeks worth of sleep. And then I went on another 6-week spell with only 1 or 2 hours of sleep, and fell even deeper into the darkness. Trazodone finally put me to sleep. I ended up taking trazodone, and I also got Ativan got added to the mix because I was experiencing insane anxiety. And I was on Ativan for 8.5 years.
Wow.
Always following. I was an extremely compliant patient. I had worked, this is another little cherry to the story. In the 80s, my first job in professional life at all was in the psychological field. I worked with chemical dependency patients for my first few years in the field. So I was very, very aware of how addictive benzodiazepines were. And
Right.
so I was terrified of getting addicted to those things. Anyway, Doc started adding new things, combinations of antidepressants, that was Prozac with Wellbutrin, Effexor, Lexapro. The same thing would happen. I'd get a little bit better for a while, and then my mood would start to deteriorate.
Over what amount of time? Like you mentioned with the Prozac that your mood was better for some amount of time. Was there a pattern, like you'd get better for a certain number of months and then it would go down? Like how long would your mood get better and then how quickly would it deteriorate?
I haven't been able to determine a lot of that yet. I mean, I'm almost 9 months into carnivory. I was poisoning myself for 57.5 years with the food I was eating.
Right.
Then throw in 20 plus years of taking these meds. I haven't even gotten into the worst part of that yet. That really only did me harm over the long run.
Right.
So I'm still learning more about what happened as I heal. And thank goodness the process is continuing.
Yeah.
But trying to fast forward through some of it, this is really an interesting thing, though. At the end of 2008, I came to I came to peace with a lot of the things that I believe caused me to have that horrible breakdown in that terrible year, couple years. And so I just went back to just Prozac, the Trazodone, and the Ativan without all the other stuff. And I started getting better. In addition to that, as you well know, drugs like Remeron and all these other antidepressants, they'll make you gain weight.
Yes, Remeron is a weight gainer.
And so is Trazodone, and Ativan's not real good for it either. So I put on some pounds. And as my mood had gotten a little bit better, I'm looking down going, honey, I need to do something about this. And she's like, oh, I've heard about this Atkins diet. Why don't you look into that? And so I went on the Atkins diet and I started losing weight and I started feeling better. But we weren't making the connection that I was feeling better at all because of the diet. It was because I was at peace with things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We just didn't know. We had no point of reference. I go back to my doctor. He says, well, you're looking great. He said, what's going on? I said, well, I'm at peace with this, and this, and things gotten better, and I changed my diet. And he's like, oh, yeah, I just started the Atkins diet, too, because he was a heavy physician type person. And he would exchange little snack recipes with me, but at no time was there any notion that it could be related to my illness.
To your psychiatric illness. This idea that food could be related to a psychiatric illness is fairly radical for most doctors to consider. I'm sure it was even more radical 10 years ago. And even today, in my world, most doctors are not aware that food is connected with how we feel and depression and anxiety. So it sounds like you were not yet making the connection, and your doctors were not yet making the connection.
And from 2009 through 2010, I had an amazing year. I lost a lot of weight. I got to go to my 30-year high school reunion. I had an amazing time. You can see the pictures on Facebook. My affect is outstanding. I knew I wasn't well, but I was a lot better, and I was able to enjoy life a little bit. But then after a while, I started eating crap again. I was like, because my thinking was, I'll enjoy this stuff for a little while and I can always just go back on Atkins. That was my thinking.
Right.
Duh. Well, I'm at Mass on a Sunday evening in July of 2010. Life's pretty good. I rode my motorcycle there. It's a pleasant evening and we're in the middle of a prayer. And Paul, I got one of those red alert, fright or flight kind of things hit me. Said, you don't go home now, something very bad is going to happen. Just out of the blue, completely. I never had anything like it. I haven't had anything like it since, truly. And going to Mass is a very important thing to me. I ran out of that church, got on my bike, and 15 minutes later, I'm home, curled up on my couch, crying like a baby, and I don't know why. And this is where things really start spiraling downward. The doctor, as a matter of fact, the physician I had, he was a really good guy. He gave me his home cell number. He used to have me call him on weekends just to let him know how I was doing. I mean, this guy really cared. He was very concerned about me. And the depression just came back worse than ever before.
And you were on the medications.
The anxiety was terrible. And then he went through a number of tried Lamictal, some other different combinations of antidepressants, and it was Symbyax was one that kind of locked me down and stopped my free fall. But with that, I would sleep 10 hours a night and take 3 2-hour naps during the day. I
Yeah.
was a vegetable, and I gained an enormous amount of weight. Then my wife's job got transferred to the Jacksonville area here in Florida, and we had to move, which didn't help because then I had to start over with new doctors in an area where I didn't know anybody. So it was like throwing a line out with some bait and hoping you reeled in something nice. And I had to go through a couple of physicians just to even be considered credible. It was ridiculous. And then I found a nurse practitioner who gave it an honest to goodness great shot. She was another person who cared, but she tried me on Abilify and it starts with an S. Why can't I remember the name of this silly drug?
Seroquel.
Seroquel, there you go. Seroquel. I was on that for a while. Boy, that one really put the fat on me too.
Yeah.
And the same thing would happen. Although with Seroquel, there was a stretch there where I thought, well, maybe this might just be it. But no. And it seemed like, interestingly enough, it wouldn't take a stressful event for my mood to just crap out, for me to do what I called falling into the ditch again. It could be a full moon. I mean, I never thought about being sensitive to full moons in my life. I knew it happened. You know as well as I do, one of the worst places to be in a psychiatric hospital, if you're working there on midnight shift, is during the full moon. Because that's when the folks who've been out in the woods talking to Jesus start knocking on doors.
Right.
You know, but I would have these horrible mood crashes in and around full moons. And it wasn't like I was looking for them. It would be like, I don't understand why I'm like this. What could be happening? What could be the cause? And we do a check, and well, there was a full moon last night. Anyway, I just got worse and worse and worse.
What did it feel like? What did those deep, dark depressions feel like? I mean, I'm sure some people listening will have experienced depression or anxiety in their life, but like can you describe for me briefly, like what was it like to be that depressed, and what did depression feel like, and what did anxiety feel like?
Okay. I appreciate you asking that. Because there's a point here, a couple of points I really want to make if you'll give me the moment. For me, depression was a combination of things. It was primarily an extreme dissatisfaction with everything. Nothing was good enough. Nothing was quite right. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't quite right. And then underneath that was a lot of sadness, because it just, and I would describe it to people as trying to walk around and live with a 50-pound handle on your head, because it's always working against you. Everything, and this is something I've come to realize even more so as I've continued to heal. Mental illness warps everything you see, or at least for me, everything I saw, touched, heard, felt, it got altered. Everything I thought got twisted, changed. It might just be a tiny little bit, but it would never be in my favor. It was never in my favor. I might come up with what logically to me seemed like the greatest idea in the world for a song, but it would hit a point, and then it would just, because my illness would let me get so far, and then it would stop me.
Right.
I get too upset, too frustrated, too anxious. This happened quite often. And the worst part is it became more and more difficult for me to communicate, especially with my wife. If there's a woman who earned her place in heaven, it's her. Because as you well know, mental illness doesn't just affect the sick person. It affects everybody in the family.
Right.
And, you know, one of my greatest regrets is that I was raising kids while I was sick. Now, lots of things I've looked back and I'm like, oh, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I thought of that. Of course, that's water over the bridge. You can't fix it. But nothing works right when you're depressed. I've had people say, oh, well, wasn't your was your creativity enhanced? You know, a lot of great art is made through, like, no, it just got in the way of me making music that I wanted to make. There's nothing good that comes from depression or mental illness. And my wife would say to me on a Sunday morning, it's a beautiful day outside. But my illness would twist that into, yeah, it's kind of a beautiful day out there. Yeah, sure. That's what I would hear. So imagine trying to communicate. She's well, that she's not crazy at all, except maybe for marrying me. But I'm unable to process what she's telling, and it became a constant. She never knew how I was going to react to anything. And, you know, here's this woman I knew adored me, but I can't make her understand anything.
That must have been so hard.
And she can't make me understand anything.
Right.
And that just grinds and grinds and grinds on you. And it was horrible. I don't recommend it. So that's why I do these things, because I was hopeless. I didn't think I'd live to see 60. I'll fast forward through the worst, awfulest parts, but to 2015, I weigh around 289 pounds.
289? How much do you weigh now, Brett?
I float between 175 and 177.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Over 100 pounds heavier from the olanzapine, from the Symbiox.
Well, at this point, this doctor took me. I'll try not to get angry over this, but it's hard. This guy, the psychiatrist, the last psychiatrist I ever saw, decided that it would be a genius move to take me off Prozac cold freaking turkey to put me on Latuda, and that I would be okay. Well, that is not what happened. Imagine, if you can, what it would feel like if somebody took a wet washcloth and rubbed it directly onto your brain matter. I had that going on for weeks, in addition to the light brain jolt zaps that constantly went on.
Yeah, a lot of times when people stop SSRI medications, a lot of times when people stop selective serotonin reuptake medications like fluoxetine, they get these brain zaps. And it's very hard for physicians and people who have not experienced that to understand what you went through there with that withdrawal from those SSRI medications. So if people are listening to this, you know, Brett has described multiple medications that he's been on. Some of them were SSRI medications. He talked about Prozac, which is fluoxetine, Remeron, which is mirtazapine. And then as you're hearing here, he really had this sort of merry-go-round of medications, which unfortunately is what happens to so many patients with psychiatric illness. If one thing doesn't work, we just go down the list and start doing more and more esoteric medications. Brett got put on mood stabilizers like Latuda, or, well, I should say he got put on mood stabilizers like Lamictal, and then he got put on antipsychotics like aripiprazole, which is Abilify. He was on a combination medication, which is Symbiox, which is fluoxetine and olanzapine. Olanzapine is an antipsychotic medication. Antipsychotic medications can cause people to gain tons of weight. They're mitochondrial toxins. And then he was also on quetiapine, which is Seroquel. It's another antipsychotic medication. So what happens in people with bad depression, like what Brett had, we would call it, you know, intractable depression or untreatable depression, is they just get through this series of medications and the side effects get worse and worse. And they get on more and more severe medications in terms of side effects, many of which cause diabetes, they cause obesity. The antipsychotic medications are well known for that. In psychiatry, we use antidepressants like fluoxetine or Prozac, and then if it doesn't work, we put people on antipsychotic medications, and those can really cause bad side effects. And it sounds like you went 289 pounds, and then you were put on lorazepam, which is Latuda, which is another antipsychotic medication that often gets used. And so, man, you just went through this merry-go-round of medications. That's incredible. Wow, that must have been miserable.
They changed diagnosis. Well, see, what happened was when all the antidepressants and all the combinations that they could come up with didn't work, Well, then then they moved me to my bipolar 2.
Right.
Which I didn't believe for a minute, especially after I read all the I'm like, no, it's just not me, but what do I know? Turns out it was one of the few times while I was sick, I was actually correct about something. And so that's when the Seroquel and all that started. And, my brain chemistry seriously was altered from like 1995. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'm no longer, I'm pharmaceutical free and have been since 2017.
That's
and
incredible.
I'll get to that part. Anyway, the one thing that I'm still able to cling to, I quit performing live after the nervous breakdown, but I continued to write music, and I've got a recording studio, and I continued to try to produce. I did produce. I successfully put out albums on the internet, but even with that, because of the illness, I couldn't process the things you needed to do accurately to mix a professional sounding mix. So I would say, the songs are amazing. The performances are great. Who mixed that? It was terrible. But I had a project called Dark Hearts Blues, and I'd been blessed to find a lady to sing these songs because I had all this blues music and I just knew I couldn't sing it. It just wasn't something I could do. And she's observing me going through all this while coming here one day a week for us to work on material. And one day this is in January, the end of January 2015, and I'm telling her what's been happening, and she's like, well, have you ever considered medical cannabis? Have you ever looked into it? And I'd had a bad experience with it when I was young. I'm a musician. It was around me all the time. I just passed left, passed right. It wasn't my thing. It just wasn't for me. So I'm like, what do I have to lose? So I did some research and got on YouTube and looked at some things and did some reading and trying to figure out what was propaganda. And of course, I'm sick while I'm doing this, so that makes it even harder. But there's enough anecdotal evidence for me and my wife to come to the conclusion, nothing else has worked. Why not? What do we have to lose?
Mm-hmm.
So we secured 4 grams of flour, which is, nothing. And she made canna butter with it. And she made these little oatmeal raisin cookies. I joke because they weren't 0 carb, but they were probably keto. A little raisin in them. They were the size of a quarter. And Paul, I was terrified of these things. I broke one in half and I ate it. And in about 10 or 15 minutes after that, I felt like 1,000 suns had lifted off my body.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't high. I just didn't feel like crap anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then about 30 or 40 minutes after that, a high kicked in, and I was like, all my symptoms were gone. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't angry. I felt great. And we found that cannabis treats the symptoms. It didn't eliminate the illness. It didn't make it go away. I found that if I maintained, a small, steady dose, tiny dose regimen, of course, it's increased over time because of tolerance, that my symptoms were just fine. I could function at a much higher level. 10 days into this experience, I'm putting my shoes on and my belly gets in my way and I get short of breath. My heart starts racing. I'm like, what in the hell? I knew I was big. I knew I was fat. I had no idea I was that big.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had no clue I was that big. And I actually saw myself in the mirror truly for the first time in years. And I was like, oh my God. I immediately told my wife, I said, honey, Atkins now. And I started on it. And then I also knew that I'd basically been sitting in a chair for 5 years. I spent 14 hours a day writing, recording, mixing music. I wouldn't do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't go anywhere. Couldn't work. I was unemployable. I wasn't fit to be around anybody while I was that sick. And, but I started walking. I started walking the dog, you know, a half a block here, a block there. And weight started slowly coming off. And, you know, then I got a mapping program and figured out how far a half a mile was from the front door, so I could figure out how far a mile walk was. And then how far is it a mile from the front door? And over the next 3.5 years, I walked off 94 pounds. At the end of 2015, I was off all the antidepressants, all the antipsychotic crap. I was off of it.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of 2016, I titrated off the Ativan.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of 2017, thanks be to God, I titrated off the damn trazodone.
Mm-hmm.
By the book, not just willy-nilly. I was, especially the Ativan was really hard to get off of. And not surprisingly, the day after my last dose, I come down with vertigo for the first time in my life that lasts 3 months.
Benzodiazepines are very hard for people to stop. That sounds difficult. So at this time you were Atkins, so you were kind of keto, right?
Kind of keto. I eliminated foods. I wasn't a measuring. I wasn't into that. Oh, this is how many grams of carbohydrates. I wasn't into any of that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Don't eat a bunch of cakes and pies and ice cream. Don't eat potatoes. I was a big potato chip freak. When I was really sick, the only time I felt good is when I was eating cake or ice cream or coconut cream pie.
Sure, you get that little dopamine hit for a small amount of time and then it goes away.
That's exactly it. And then you had to, you know, my wife would buy these huge coconut cakes, you triple layer. I could go through it in 2 days, 3 days tops. It was disgusting. But I'm walking this off. I'm getting better, but I'm still dependent on cannabis. I mean, I learned I had to go out of town and couldn't, you know, it's to an illegal state, couldn't take it with me. And fortunately, I was only there just a few days, like 4 days, 5 days, but it took me like 6 weeks to get back to the good level of stable after that.
Mm-hmm. Because you went off cannabis for a few days.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And you know, my anxiety, the anger, the obnoxious behavior. Anyway,
it came back. Those symptoms came back when you stopped the cannabis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, all of it. I didn't get to the part to where I started getting depressed again. Thank God.
Mm-hmm.
I that would have been horrible. But it just took. My wife would, you know, we would confer about these things. She's like, "You're not quite right yet. You're not back to where you should be." But I would get there. Anyway, fast forward now. I'm getting better. Fast forward to the spring. April of 2018, this same lady, and I'm going to say her name. Her name's Kimmy Wade. She's a talented singer, and God bless her, because none of this happened without her telling me, A, to look at cannabis, and B, she sends me a message. She says, oh my gosh, you got to go watch every video this man has ever done. And it was Jordan Peterson. So I don't need to go into what he's about. That led me to him talking about Michaela, his daughter, and how she'd figured out and healed herself of her depression, her arthritis, and how he had successfully treated his depression. My jaw's on the floor. If it's anybody, this man with his integrity, I'm passing by. But because it's him, I actually investigate further. The next thing I find is Sean Baker's on Joe Rogan.
Right.
And at this point, you know, my wife and I are watching it. We're looking at each other like, is this too good to be true? And then after that, I'm led to a talk in Keto Fest 2017 by Amber O'Hearn about the anthropological evidence about how we came out of the trees literally by eating meat. And enough of the puzzle was put together to where I look at my wife, I got to do this. July 16, 2018, I started living carnivorously. I gave up eggs a week into it because suddenly they weren't satisfying. They tasted good, they looked good, but they weren't satisfying. And I've had nothing but meat and water since.
So you're just doing meat and water?
Exactly.
Wow.
10 days into it, I woke up, I didn't have any joint pain anymore. I didn't know I had joint pain. I thought I just had aches and pains from living 57 years. You break bones, you fall down, things creak a little, but I was never diagnosed. I woke up without it. I was like a 10-year-old skipping down the street in my morning walk. It was
in 10 days after you stopped. 10 days.
10 days.
Yeah.
On the 23rd day, I knew something amazing was happening. And by the 24th day, all of my depression symptoms were gone.
And were you taking cannabis or did you stop?
Oh, no, I'm still taking cannabis. I'm still using cannabis. And I'll get to why there's a good reason for that. But I mean, the depression I didn't just feel better. I felt like I had been just transformed. I mean, I'm feeling real joy for the first time in years. And I still get emotional about it because it's such a beautiful thing to be free of that awful anvil, this horrible grinding that went on in my head for so long. It was gone. And it hasn't come back. And I truly believe as long as I continue to eat this way, I won't ever have to worry about it.
That's incredible to have it for 40 years, you said, and then it's gone after 28 days without plants. I mean, what do you think? Like, when that happened, were you just like, this is incredible? Like, were you in disbelief? I mean, did you think that it might come back the next day?
No, I had faith in the testimony. I'd done a lot of research. I'd been to meatheals.com and read the testimonials there. I'm watching people like you, trying to learn more about it while it's going on. I'm seeing other people tell their stories. Other long-term carnivores have been living, 5-10 years this way. So I kind of felt pretty confident that it was going to work, although Michaela Peterson reported it was just a couple of weeks for her before her depression got better. So on day 15 or 16, I was like, but it's gone. I mean, I rejoice over this. I'm so incredibly fortunate because, as you know, most people who suffer mental illness that long, they die young.
They don't get better, and definitely they do. It's interesting to note, though, that it did take about 3 weeks. And so sometimes people will try a carnivore diet, and the first couple of weeks can be kind of rough for people. They might get diarrhea, they might get GI symptoms, and they quit. But, I always kind of encourage people, give it a month, see how you feel after a month. There's definitely an adjustment phase. During that first phase, did you get some adjustment symptoms?
Well, I was fortunate because I was so low carb before I started,
right.
And I'd been low carb. I've been on steak and eggs I've been eating most of the eggs for a long time. I got asked this question and I completely forgot. June 2018, I was eating mainly eggs and some steak. And then when I crossed over into carnivory, the eggs lasted a week, and then it was steak and pork. But I always made sure, one of the things I noticed in my reading where people would say, I'm getting tired of just eating meat. They would always just eat one kind of meat. So I always made sure I had two. And one of those has to be bacon. It just works. No meat. Every meal I have is like the most delicious thing I've ever put in my mouth. It's never boring. I eat till I'm not another bite full. And it's interesting because when you're not another bite full, I can swallow that last bite that maxes me out and still be chewing on something. I can't swallow what's still in my mouth. I have to literally spit it out in a dog's bowl. I cannot swallow it.
You're just fully satiated.
Exactly.
And now,
I'm content.
Yeah. At what point did you stop eating all the plants?
I stopped eating plants on July 16, 2018.
Okay. So you were eating some plants before that.
Yeah, I was down to just some leafy vegetables, just some, not. See, I was fortunate also in that as an adult, I was mostly a meat, bread, and potatoes kind of guy. I didn't eat a lot of vegetables because I'd been spoiled growing up. If they weren't fresh out of the garden, they came out of a can, they were disgusting to me.
Right.
So I wasn't eating a lot of vegetables through my illness years, or my worst years. But I believe it was the grains is what really caused me the most harm. And looking back.
So I think grains are incredibly triggering for a lot of people. It's interesting. Your story parallels Jordan Peterson's, because Michaela convinced him to do meat and greens. And then he got rid of the greens, which I would argue are some of the more toxic things. You know, the plant leaves are quite toxic, whether it's oxalates or isothiocyanates in the brassica vegetables. Getting rid of the leafy greens is often what triggers a lot of healing for people. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I was fortunate though, because I was so low carb. I had some minor gassiness, stomach discomfort. I had loose stool for the first 5 months, but after my depression went away, I would see people complaining about having loose stool and diarrhea. I'm like, but my depression went away. Who cares? Who cares if I have loose stool for the rest of my days?
Yeah.
I'm not sick anymore.
And this is, yeah, I'll just mention to people here, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
That's all right.
People talk about the loose stool on carnivore, and I've talked about this on some of my videos on YouTube and a little bit on Instagram. But I think the idea there is that some people don't absorb the bile acids. When we're doing a lot of meat, we're making a lot of bile acids in the gallbladder, and not everybody absorbs those very well in the small intestine. And so it takes some people's bodies, I think, a long time to absorb those bile acids again and adjust I think that the sicker people are, the longer they might have diarrhea as their small intestine heals. And then also there's a die-off of gut flora and a switch over in terms of a carbohydrate-liking microbiome to a protein and fat-liking microbiome. And some people say, like, man, I've had diarrhea for 3 months. And it's interesting to hear yours lasted 5 months and then it stopped.
Yeah, it did. And every aspect of my life has been immensely improved. I don't mean just a little bit improved. I mean immensely, like beyond my imagination. I have energy. I literally physically feel better than I did when I was 20 years old. Physically feel, I have more energy. I can put in an 8-hour day on my feet all day long, physically active, come home, sit in a chair for 10 minutes, get my take a breath. I'm ready for a whole evening's worth of activities, whatever they may be, with zero fatigue on any level. The one thing that did take a while, it took me about 5 months to completely lose the anxiety.
Wow, that's a long time. Okay.
It took about 5 months. Well, part of that was because I had been so isolated, and it took me a while to get used to be around people. and dealing with situations that I hadn't I went back to work in a real job, a real non-musical job, because I don't consider music jobs real jobs in that same sense. And, there was a major adjustment period. And, as you can imagine, coming out of a depression like that is a pretty profound experience. And you just don't have a ready tool set full of happy skills.
Right. You don't know how to be happy.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I still use cannabis to this day, and without the cannabis, my mood stays awesome. I don't get sad. I don't get depressed. I'm not angry, but I become this hypercritical, obnoxious person.
Huh. Interesting.
And who wants to be around that? Who wants to be like that? But when I still use the cannabis, you get what you're seeing now, 24/7. I'm this happy, genuinely polite, nice person that I've always wanted to be. I don't understand it. I wish somebody would study me. I mean, my gosh, if somebody would make an interesting case study, I would have to be it. I mean, seriously.
Do you do any supplements?
No, I did do, I had the cramping in my lower extremities, my feet and my shins. We did magnesium spray and then magnesium drops for a while, and it would get better. But then it got a little worse just a few weeks ago, and I'm reading in the Zeroing In on Health group where the people have been doing this for so many years, and they're like, do without anything. Just keep eating, drinking, don't put any more spray on. And it's resolved itself.
Yeah.
So I think that's just another, as I understand it, magnesium's plentiful in the body, but it's just not present in that particular location at the time when it's needed. It's kind of how it works.
The electrolytes are a little tricky, electrolytes are an interesting thing. It does seem like when people transition to keto, and I know you were keto or keto-like before you went carnivore, it does seem like when people transition to keto, they often have some electrolyte changes. A lot of people are maybe not eating enough salt. When insulin drops, we don't hold on to salt enough. when we're salt deficient, our magnesium gets a little off, and then the potassium gets a little off. So for a lot of people, for keto flu and for the transition to keto or carnivore, they need to just really pay attention to how much salt they're eating. Are you using salt, presumably?
Oh yeah, I cook with salt.
Any other
That's all I
spices?
cook with. Salt and butter.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So you're doing salt and butter.
Yeah, salt and butter. And people talk about, oh, that's really strict what you're doing. It's been the most liberating experience of my life. I mean, I'm not hungry between meals. I don't think about food at all, except okay, how much bacon's left, and is the meat thawed out? Those are the only terms I think of in terms of meal. I'm never hungry between meals, ever. I had people, well, you look like you're starving. I'm not starving myself.
How many meals a day do you eat?
I only eat 3 right now. In the beginning, I ate 4.
Wow.
I would have 3 main meals, and then I would have this big thing of bacon in the evening, and it worked. I feel certain it's because I was healing so significantly.
You were so hungry.
Yeah, I hadn't actually experienced normal hunger signals either, and God knows when.
Right.
So, it's all a big transition, and adaptation is real. So if you think you're going to get well instantly and not have some hurdles to climb, folks, disabuse yourself of that right now, because you're going to run into some bumps along the way, but it's worth the experience.
Now, here's my question. Well, I got a couple of questions for you. Do you drink coffee?
No, I do not. I gave up caffeine. I used to drink a gallon or more of tea every day.
That's trouble.
I gave that up. I gave caffeine up in 2017 because it was like, okay, you've drank enough tea for 10 lifetimes. It's time to stop.
Yeah.
And so I just dropped it.
People always ask me about coffee and tea on Instagram. I've kind of tried to start commenting on this. I'm going to do a whole YouTube video about coffee, but I'll just let people know who are watching this. I'm not a fan of tea because of the tannins. And I think there are some concerns that there are compounds in the tea that could irritate the gut lining and cause leaky gut. Leaky gut is kind of a colloquial term, but the concern is that even tea is a plant compound, and there are a lot of these tannins coming from the leaves, which are bitter, and those could irritate the gut lining. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here, what we're probably doing, what probably happened in your case, Brett, your case is so remarkable. Like, you had real inflammatory depression, in my opinion. You had, I've talked about this in some of my podcasts in the past, that some people get depressed because there's bad stuff happening in their life. But your depression sounds like the type of depression that I would call endogenous depression, meaning it's coming from an organic cause within you. It's like an illness. It's an autoimmune disease. And I would say this, I've said this on many podcasts, that I really think a lot of psychiatric disease is autoimmune in nature. It's our immune system reacting against your body and your brain is just kind of on fire and inflamed. You just seemed like no matter what was happening in your life, whether it was a sunny day or anything, you just couldn't process things right. And so this is what's interesting about psychiatry to me, is that there are people who get sick just because it's a medical illness. It's an autoimmune immunologic phenomenon that we're talking about. And also, we know there are people who have psychiatric illness because there are stressful things in their life. They can both coexist, but there are multiple types of psychiatric illness. And I would argue that a lot of it is autoimmune. And when we remove the triggers, like you're seeing here, when you removed grains, which were some of the last plants that you were eating, your immune system started to heal. And I love that you're highlighting that it doesn't happen overnight, that it happens in a weeks to a month time frame, but that these plants, these grains, the potatoes or the leafy greens, even leafy greens, can be triggering immunologic reactions in people and causing immunologic depression and anxiety. That's such an incredible thing. Does all that sound reasonable to you?
Oh, it sounds 100% on the money, and I agree with everything you said. It's because if I hadn't experienced the healing, you eliminate that. It's the most indescribable. It's like trying to articulate what a broken bone is like to somebody who's never had one.
Right.
If you've never come out of depression before, you just can't. It's like, I don't want to use a lot of these terms because you're just being silly and whatnot. No, it's not magic. It's real, but it's profound. It's amazing, and it's almost impossible to describe how wonderful it is. I felt like I'd lost more weight.
I've heard people say this. You feel like a weight. You said that you felt like you'd had weight lifted off your shoulders.
Yeah, it's an incredible sensation. And every day, everything still gets better. I mean, my cognitive stuff is still, I have moments, I have been pretty good tonight, but there are moments where there's a break between the thought and the word coming out of my mouth. There'll be this pause, and I'm like, and I know what that is. I know that that's got to be residual damage from all having your brain chemistry altered for that many years. I want to be studied. I think I'd be to find out these things.
I know. Yeah. Well, I've got one more question for you, but I also want to just highlight something for people. And it's this idea that, a couple of things. You mentioned the time frame, that it may not happen right away. The other thing that I thought was awesome that you mentioned was that you didn't even know that you had joint pain until you woke up without it. When I went carnivore 8 months ago, within the first week, I noticed an improvement in my mood and attention and overall outlook on life. And I didn't even know that that was a problem for me. I've never had depression or anxiety in my own life, but my outlook on life was so much better in like a week. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And I've heard people talk about mental clarity. And in my case, it wasn't due to ketones because I was eating a little honey and I was not in ketosis. And I really believe that it was due to, and I think this is the pattern we're seeing, it's the removal of these plant toxins and these plant antigens that are triggering a little bit of chronic inflammation in the brain, in the body, and the joint pain goes away because this chronic inflammation is gone. And the immune system is allowed to kind of stop fighting the brain a little bit. The microglia in the brain just come down and they calm down. So it's a really incredible thing.
I haven't had a headache, honest to goodness, a single headache since the 3rd week into carnivory.
And you had a lot before?
Oh, my head hurt constantly with the meds and you wake up, or if I had an anxiety attack, then I'd have the Ativan hangover afterwards. And it was just, I hurt all the time. My stomach felt like it was on fire for years. I probably paid for several vacations for the people who make antacids. It was nuts. And see, all of that has been eliminated. All of that is gone. My digestion is flawless. I don't have any discomfort. I used to have hemorrhoids. They're gone. Who knew that would happen? Who knew?
I love talking about perfect poops on carnivore. I don't go into that. I don't go describing that. But I don't have any problems at all. I'm not I haven't had any dietary fiber in 9 months as of this coming Monday. And you're not constipated.
No, I feel amazing.
And you don't look like you have scurvy. All right, last question. Can I convince you to eat some liver?
I actually, because I've watched some of your stuff, last week I had one chicken liver wrapped in bacon, fried in lard, and it was good.
Nice, good.
What I was taught I learned from the Charles Washington, Sean Baker kind of school of carnivory, if you will. Eat the meat you could crave and can afford.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, what I crave and can afford is 90-10 ground beef. It's the most satisfying thing I've ever eaten in my life. And the bacon that I have 6 to 10, I was eating a lot more bacon. I cut the bacon down a lot because I don't feel like I need as much. And it's working. It's been the only real adjustment I've made is cutting the bacon back. And then I have, if I do feel slightly under the weather through the course of the day, I'll drink homemade bone broth.
So you're having some bone broth. Okay, that's good. So you're having some collagen.
The hour before bedtime, I always have at least 12 ounces of bone broth.
Okay.
And I recommend that to everybody. If you're starting out in carnivory, have some homemade bone broth. Don't buy store-bought because you don't know what's in it. Learn how to make it yourself.
Too many spices in that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Just get you a big slow cooker. It's easy.
All right. So we got to get you eating a little more liver. You're going to have to, if you're willing to, I'd love for you to do the liver experiment and see how you feel with a little more liver. You know, I was talking to Michaela Peterson recently, and she said that she's eating liver. And I know that Jordan Peterson eats liver now. I think it's interesting for people to think about this nose to tail concept. And I just don't want people to get long-term nutrient deficiencies. You know, I worry about folate and stuff, and man, you are thriving and I'm so happy for you. I just want to suggest that. I'll never tell you what to do. And if you're doing great, do your thing. But I would be the only thing I'd add, like, think about a little liver, you know, maybe some salmon roe too.
The one thing that I want to share also real quickly is you're so much more in tune with how you feel with your body.
Yeah.
And it's like nobody told me, hey, you need to cut back on the bacon. It was like, I knew I needed to just dial it back a little bit. Not cut it out, but just a little bit.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's worked beautifully. And I'm confident. I've made it a point and promised to myself, I'm going to have some liver at least once a month.
Okay.
At least once a month. I'm going to try to do a little bit better just because I like the concept of the nose to tail very much, and I can see where it could be very beneficial. But because I haven't felt poorly, I've just felt amazing. I haven't like rushed to it.
Fair.
But eating liver is not going to hurt me.
I would say no. I think it's going to be good for you. Well, Brett, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate this from the perspective of someone in psychiatry, because it's awesome for me to see that people can get better with this severity of depression and anxiety. I think if there are any people watching this who work in mental health, who are psychiatrists or psychiatric nurses or work with psychiatric patients, I really hope that Brett's story will resonate with you, because I'm sure that those people have seen this. If people have family members who have seen this level of anxiety and depression, it's just really scary, because people feel like they're never going to get better. And it's awesome to see that just this simple dietary change and cutting out plants, which we're just told are the best thing in the world for us, you know, is resulting in this change. And you're clearly doing great, you know, on a very simple diet and thinking about nose to tail. It's awesome. So thanks for coming on. Where can people find you if they want to hear more or reach out to you or listen to your music? Or
well, you can find me, you can listen to my music, and I also do a Periscope 4 or 5 days a week discussing carnivory that I upload to YouTube. You can find that at Thankful Carnivore. You can find me on Instagram at thankful.carnivore. I also do a lot of stuff on Twitter, and you can find me there at Stickman Bleeding. I got to spell that. It's STICKMANBLEEDIN. Do not add a G. You won't find me. And at the YouTube site, in addition to the Periscope, there's some music videos, some lyric videos there. You can find me, hear some of my music under the moniker Stickman Bleeding or Dark Hearts Blues. And then I have a symphonic rock project called Epiphany Rain. You can look for those at Amazon Music or iTunes or anywhere like that. You can check it out.
I'm going to check out some of your music, man. I hadn't listened to it before we got on, but I'm going to check it out after.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I will list the links of Brett's contacts in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for coming on, my friend. It's great to connect with you. And I'm sure that I will see you at a keto con or something in the future, and I'll have to shake your hand and we'll eat a steak together.
Nothing would thrill me more. It's actually doing these kinds of things has suddenly become a new calling in life, because there's so many people out there that are hopeless. I used to be hopeless. I want to share my story so that people can find hope.
I love it. I love it. All right, guys. Thanks for watching this video. I will see you guys soon.